Is that the one I put the giant shopping cart on?
Yeah.
I love it.
Stocking up on the bread milk already, boys. Let's go.
I know it's got a big target on the southeast. We're all doomed.
Snowpocalypse.
Was that a Joe Bastardi?
It was a Joe Bastardi. Yeah. I haven't read his commentary on it yet. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Carolina Weather Group. This is the Wednesday, August 15th, 2018 edition of our little weather get-together. This is show number 244. And tonight we have with us Russ Schumacher. He is the associate professor at Colorado State University and also the climatologist for the state of Colorado. So we're happy to have Russ on with us tonight. We're going to be talking about severe weather. We're going to be talking about derechos and MCS, MCV systems, and kind of how we can classify what each of those definitions are. I know the national media likes to use the derecho word a little bit maybe out of context. So tonight, hopefully we can clarify the meaning of that and kind of let you know what a derecho is and what these others are as we continue the show tonight. But we are broadcasting live right now on Periscope and Facebook Live, also our YouTube page. So we'd love to have some interaction from you. You can do that pretty easily with us. There's a comment feature on both the Periscope and Facebook Live and the YouTube page. So if you have any questions throughout the show, please feel free to send them our way. We'd love to answer them. And we'll also, towards the end of the show, let you learn how you can get in touch with our guest tonight, Russ. We'll let him share his information and maybe how you can follow along with what he is doing in the meteorological world. So that is our live broadcast tonight. And as always, we will tune the audio around and we'll let you be able to download the podcast version in the next day or so. So that is the kind of the housekeeping rules. Let's go around quickly to our panel and bring in everyone. We'll start over in the Memphis, Tennessee area. Eric, I know for us here in the Southeast, it's kind of been a dry period. We've not had many storms. It's been a little bit less humid, but the heat's still sticking around. How's things out in the Mid-South?
Very similar, Scotty. We've had actually pretty high pops on several days over the last week, and nothing really has materialized. And so we're entering that phase again for the next few days with kind of a upper low to our west moving this direction. We're hoping to get some rain out of it, but it has been pretty dry. The heat's back, and people are starting to complain again. So I know it must be summer once again here in Memphis. We did have a kind of an interesting phenomenon today. The health department here and meteorologist here in Shelby County, where we're located, put out a air quality alert for Saharan dust. We had particulate matter that was basically of code orange level today, and the origins of that was Saharan dust that moved around the high pressure system in the southeast and came up over our area. And the sunrise this morning was a little hazy, a little yellow, and so kind of looked like a little bit different than what we usually get here. But for those who deal with asthma and those kind of things, it's certainly no laughing matter. So that should move out of here. We'll get some rain, and that'll help clear things out a little bit.
Now, Eric, are you guys getting any of the haze from the smoke from Ridgeland Fire across over your area as well?
We got real close the last couple of days. There was a jet streak that was kind of went down over Kentucky, southeast, into middle Tennessee. Could see it real well on satellite. It missed the Memphis metro area, but yeah, it was pretty close. It would have another 50, 100 miles to the southwest, and it would have been right over us too. So a couple of different interesting phenomena in the mid-south the last few days.
Very interesting. Very interesting. We normally talk about the Saharan dust with tropical development, but it's interesting that it's kind of affecting you guys, which should really be no surprise to us, Eric, because last year's tropical season, it seemed like everything came through Memphis anyway. So
right,
we'll bring the dust there too.
When there's no storms, we get the cause for having no storms, and that's the dust.
That's right. Well, let's go over to let's bring in Christopher Jackson, who is in the Columbia, South Carolina area tonight. Chris, how's things going there in the Columbia area?
Much the same, just like what Eric's having over in Memphis. A couple of days we kind of dried out from the past couple of weeks. It seemed like it rained every day. Been getting pretty warm again. I think 94 today at Metro at the airport. That's what the National Weather Service got. And, a lot of humidity's back. But with the mid-level capping in place, just no storms been able to develop. And looking like it's going to stay that way for at least the next couple of days.
I know, Chris, with you being a storm lover, you probably miss the storms. But covering-wise, it's kind of nice to have a break.
Oh, absolutely. It's just weird to look up and just see bluebird skies in like August. It's like, come on, man, really?
All right. Well, thank you for that report, Chris. Let's go down to Charleston, South Carolina. We'll bring in Jared Smith. Jared, how's things down there in the Charleston area?
Well, it's been soggy, very soggy. And then we got something that masquerades as a break, in that it rains every other day versus every day. But there's still, still like just a powder keg of moisture. Significant flooding yesterday in the Somerville area. It's a place that you don't normally associate with flooding down here. You usually think about downtown. You usually think about, rain at high tide. It's all over. But that is not the case. That's not been really a major issue over the last couple days. So just on and off rain. It's August in Charleston. We get those kinds of issues. We've had a little bit of haze here ourselves. We've had some of the smoke from the fires up in Canada and California route its way down, a little dip in the jet stream, and has made for some hazy sunrises and some yellow moons down here as well. So some pretty fascinating true color imagery on Go 16. I don't have it punched out, but it's out there. Maybe we'll share that in a tweet of the week later tonight.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jared. And I will report for James, who is not here tonight. For the North Carolina area, much of the same of what everyone else has been talking about. We have been on the drier side. And like Eric was talking about, and Jared, we have had those hazy conditions with the jet stream set up just right. Some of that wildfire smoke from Canada has made its way here into the Carolinas. But it looks like we're going to start to kind of turn the page here, and we're going to get a lot more moisture building into the area. with an approaching cold front over the weekend, and that's going to trigger some thunderstorms and possibly some heavy rain. So we had a little reprieve from the storms, and it looks like we're going to go back into those as we head towards the weekend. So that's kind of a recap of what's going on in North Carolina. I now want to turn it over to Shay Gibson. And Shay, the tropics, it looks like we have one storm that has formed, but it's way, way up into the northern Atlantic.
Yes, that's right, Scotty. So we have subtropical storm Ernesto, which formed this morning. It was subtropical. I'm sorry. It was tropical depression number 5, and it quickly transitioned to subtropical storm. So this area of the Atlantic is still showing fairly warm sea surface temperatures. You can see here right now our data in the data scope is out on the sea surface temperatures, but this sort of regional map here or northern hemisphere, you can see the area of the Atlantic where these warm plumes are coming out across from the Gulf Stream. And so we've had 2 storms that have formed over this area briefly. So as soon as this moves over cooler water, we do suspect that it will dissipate rather quickly. And here's its track heading off to Ireland. Maybe they'll get a little something from this storm eventually in time, but it won't be tropical by any means. If we go back down here, we have another tropical wave that we are watching. This one has a 10% chance next 48 hours, 20% chance next 5 days. It is in a rather conducive environment right now. There isn't a whole lot of Saharan dust aloft mixing in with this system, and the tropical wave does look rather impressive. In fact, if we look at it on IR satellite loop, we can see it approaching, sort of heading towards the Leeward Islands right now. And this tropical wave is starting to have more of a vertical trough axis that is looking a little bit more impressive in time. So the NHC went ahead and circled this. I was just talking about before the show, and then I clicked on the NHC update, and there it was. So the 1020. But if we take a closer look, we can see the convection is starting to sort of get a little bit organized. There's no surface circulation right now, and that's what we look for in order to define a tropical depression or any kind of development towards a tropical cyclone. However, there is a lot of upper shear over the Caribbean right now, so it doesn't look like it is favored to last, even if it does form into something. It even says it here on the NHC that the upper level winds are expected to become less conducive for any significant development to occur when the system moves over the Eastern Caribbean Sea. So that's kind of it right now for the tropics. We're starting to get into that time of the year where we are heading towards the peak of the season. In fact, I'll go ahead and pull this up. Just a constant reminder that we are not over, we're not past this peak time of September 10th. So between now and then, we could still see some activity. The intertropical convergence zone, this is the time when it starts to lift a little bit further north and we get into our Cape Verde season. So we'll have to watch and see what the cooler sea surface temperatures out there are going to do, or I should say cooler than normal. They're not really that cool. A lot of people are sort of, I wouldn't say misled, but they may think that there's this cool body of water out there that nothing's going to develop. And that's not true. The waters are warm. They're just a little bit cooler than normal. We'll have to continue to watch the intertropical convergence zone for any waves coming across, and also near the continental United States for any homegrown systems to develop, especially with our cold fronts dropping into the southeast region one after the other and fizzling away. So other than that, we're doing pretty well in the tropics. Nothing to be concerned about right now. So back to you, Scotty.
Thank you, Shay. And I believe this came out after our show last week, but NOAA kind of gave an update about the tropical season, and they kind of are in line with everyone else. Am I correct?
Yeah, they dropped their 60% chance to have below average season, and they're only expecting one major hurricane. So, Colorado State, they dropped theirs, NOAA dropped theirs down as far as activity goes. But that doesn't mean we won't see one, and it only takes one. That's the big hashtag that you got to remember. It only takes one, because if that one major hurricane develops and hits the United States, then hey, we've had another upset. Last year was a sore reminder of how you should just always remain prepared for any kind of hurricane or tropical system that makes landfall. Have your evacuation plan in place and have your hurricane kit.
All right, thank you for that report, Shay. We always appreciate getting into the tropics and diving into that. Let's bring in our guest now. We have Mr. Russ Schumacher on, associate professor at Colorado State University, and also the climatologist for the state of Colorado. And maybe a little bit more fun fact, he is a Jeopardy winner. So Russ, welcome to the show. We appreciate you joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Well, since you are a first-time guest, we always start off with this question with our first-timers is kind of give us your backstory. Maybe how the weather bug bit you, what got you interested into it, and kind of your journey from your start of love of weather to what you're doing today.
Yeah, so I think probably like all of us, there were moments in our childhood or whatever that got us interested in the weather. And one that always sticks out for me is so I grew up in Minnesota in the Twin Cities area, and there's a pretty famous tornado video of this tornado that was filmed by a news helicopter in 1986 in the Twin Cities area there, and people can look it up on YouTube it's still one of the best tornado videos that there is, I think. But that was, in the days when there was only 3 channels on TV and you watched the local news every night, and that was live broadcast. They had the news helicopter, I think, was just out there, doing the normal traffic or whatever, and then this tornado develops, and just fascinating dynamics of the flow and the tornado dissipating and forming again, and going over water for a little while, like sucking up the water. So it's a pretty fascinating video still to watch to this day. And so that was one of that along with, these were the early days of the Weather Channel, and we had cable at my house. And so we watched the weather, I watched the Weather Channel a lot, and local on the 8s and everything else. And so that kind of, got me all interested in it. And then I went, when I went to college, I kind of decided I want to study meteorology. I went to Valparaiso University in Indiana and studied meteorology there, and then came here to Colorado for graduate school at Colorado State. So I came here and was in PhD here, and then I went to NCAR just down the road in Boulder for a little bit, and then I got my first job at Texas A&M University. So I was there, I guess, an honorary Aggie for a couple of years for working there, and then a position opened up back here at CSU where I had gone to school, and couldn't turn down the opportunity to come back to Colorado. And so I've been here on the faculty since 2011. And then took over as the kind of added on the state climatologist role about almost a year ago.
So, excuse me, for our followers who may not know, and then we'll get into our topic tonight, but what does a climatologist do? What is your responsibilities there?
Yeah, so it actually it varies a bit from state to state. The program used to be like a federal program back until the 70s, where it was like a sort of like a branch of the Weather Service, I think. But then they farmed it out to the states, and so it's a little different in each state. In quite a few states, it's at the land grant Ag University, and so that's how we are here, and Texas, and quite a few of the other states. But some states it's a state government position. Some states it's more of an extension position. But here it's, my predecessor was Nolan Duskin, who was not a professor, but worked here at CSU for about 40 years, and he's retired now, but still is active in the community. And so a lot of what we do is honest, so my background is in studying floods and storms and things like that, but a lot of what we do in the office actually is monitoring drought and sort of statewide conditions with respect to that, and providing information for the U.S. Drought Monitor. We have a sort of burgeoning state mesonet that our office operates. So it's mainly an agricultural weather network, but we're trying to kind of build it up into more, wider reach, so that it is more of a mesonet in line with what some other states have. Of course, we meet with and present to stakeholders all across the state, some in the state government and water groups, agriculture groups, and so forth. So we do a lot of that. And then the one other sort of unique thing in our office that originated here in Fort Collins is the Cokerus network that probably a lot of people are familiar with, the citizen science rain gauge network. You put a rain gauge in your backyard and take those measurements every day and send them in. And so that was invented or founded here after a big flood that we had in Fort Collins in '87. And so Nolan, who was the state climatologist before me, realized we had very little rain data. And this was one of those storms where the west side of town had 10 or 12 inches of rain and the east side of town had like less than an inch, and there was just no measurements. And so he realized, well, people can put these little gauges in their backyard and we can get pretty good measurements. And so it started here in Colorado and is now nationwide and even internationally a little bit with Canada and the Bahamas. And so it's kind of a fun new thing to be able to be involved with that network as well and see how valuable that data can be.
That's really cool. And Shade, correct me if I'm wrong, but we had Nolan on a few years ago, didn't we? Talking about Cokerus.
Oh yeah, we sure did. In fact, yeah, that was great. I mean, boy, we learned a lot from him. That was great. That was a good show.
Yeah, and as you know, as a rainfall researcher myself, kind of coming into this, you've been now getting kind of ingrained in the network here. You probably don't realize that those plastic gauges that people are reading every day that in many ways is sort of the gold standard of rainfall measurements. We need automated stations too, of course, because to get the high, the time resolution and everything else. But having something that someone goes and looks at every day is often the most accurate measurement.
I've got one in my backyard.
All right, excellent,
good job.
Well, Russ, one thing that we wanted to bring you on, and Dr. Philip Klotzbach actually recommended you for this topic. So we are very happy to get his recommendation and reach out to you. We want to talk about severe weather, and I know that's one thing that you've studied a lot of it, and the different severe weather complexes. Occasionally the general public, maybe those who have a little bit of interest in weather, may have heard the terms derecho or MCS or MCV systems. And so tonight, that's what we're wanting to kind of talk about, is those different complexes. So maybe the next time that you guys who are listening tonight or watching tonight, maybe you'll have a better understanding of what us meteorologists are talking about. And I guess the first one, the big elephant in the room, is a derecho. It seems like every media outlets, every different weather outlet per se has a different definition of maybe what a derecho is. So let's start there and give us an idea of maybe what the correct term of a derecho is and what kind of weather we expect with this.
Yeah. So the I'm going to bring. I'll see if I can get my screen sharing to work here, but I'll bring up this. Let's see. It's going to work. Share. There we go. This, can you guys see this? It's a bunch of text. So does it show up?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So this is kind of the interesting backstory of this phrase that I wasn't even that aware of. I knew it was an old term, but the kind of history of it was that this researcher in Iowa was studying the wind damage that would often happen in Iowa, but he realized that tornadoes were getting a lot of attention at this time in the 1870s and 1880s. But he didn't think they were produced by tornadoes. It looked like it was coming from straight line winds. And so he kind of came up with this alternate, Spanish term to tornado, which has Spanish origin. And so he used the term derecho for straight ahead, or direct. And so then that kind of entered the meteorological literature in 1888. So it's a very, very old terminology as far as meteorology goes. But then it sort of made its first resurgence back in the 1980s from this paper by Bob Johns, who is a longtime forecaster at the Storm Prediction Center, and basically it's to describe long-lasting swaths of wind damage that cover large areas. And so they came up with, in their analysis, came up with this sort of very specific definition that's shown here, which has been debated a lot in the meantime, and we can come back to that in a minute. But it essentially, what it tries to describe is a long, it's not just a strong winds from a single thunderstorm. It's a large complex, an organized complex that lasts for many hours and produces severe wind, very, very strong wind along its entire path. So some of these things that you see in this definition, you have to have concentrated severe gusts that last for over, or that stretch over 400 kilometers or 250 miles. It has to be non-random, so basically kind of a swath or a series of swaths. And there have to also be reports with significant damage. So as sort of the SPC definition goes of 65 knots or greater, or if there's a damage survey, then F1 or EF1 or greater damage, and then it has to kind of persist for this whole time. So this is sort of the sciencey definition of this phrase, which I think was primarily only used among meteorologists, for the most part, until a couple big events that happened in the early 2000s. One was a system in Missouri in 2009. Where the sort of became phrased the super derecho, because it kind of spun up, even though it looked like a little one, produced a broad swath of winds, not only in the sort of leading edge of the squall line, but back in that circulation too. And then probably the most famous one then that, since there's all kinds of media and lots of people there, was the June 2012 system that went through started in, up close to Chicago, and then went all the way across Indiana, Ohio, and then even went across the Appalachians and into the DC area, and knocked out power across all of DC and the surrounding areas for a very long time. And so that phrase then kind of really came back into vogue, I think, with that system that was a really, really destructive and impactful system. And so now it seems like, as you were noting, the media jumps on that term anytime there's a windstorm or a forecast of a squall line or things like that. But that's sort of some of the background, I guess, of where that particular term comes from, and I guess how it's been used over time and or maybe misused over time.
That's a great backstory and definition. And like you said, and like we pointed out, it seems like every wind event now with storms are now derechos. But hopefully now that you guys are listening and following along, there are certain criteria to what a derecho is. Russ, if you can, kind of give us a background. What is a derecho setup? Like, we just don't see derechos happen every day. We have to have particular ingredients kind of come together for these systems.
Yeah, so I think the one that often gets set up in systems sort of like the 2012 derecho and many others is you get it's when the big ridge of high pressure kind of builds in over the continent in the summertime, and so usually you got a big high over the south or the southeast. And then so it's getting really hot and humid underneath that high, and then it's just to the kind of on the fringe of that ridge, just to the north of that ridge, then where the jet stream is and the flow is stronger, and so you're pumping all that hot moist air up from the south, but it's way too capped under the high to actually get any storms going. But once you get into that slightly cooler air to the north, then you've got just huge instability, and now you've built up enough shear in that area such that the once the storms get going, they often pretty quickly organize into these lines, and they move in that fast flow around the ridge, and it's the sort of ring of fire pattern that people sometimes talk about, where you get consecutive days of storms forming on the north side of that ridge and sort of rolling all the way around anticyclonically around the clockwise around the upper level ridge. And so that at least in the kind of in the Midwest sort of area is where those often the kind of scenario where those often show up, but they can occur in other places as well. Let me see if I think I've got a map here from a somewhat recent paper that I'll see that has a nice description of there we go, of where these derechos occur. So this is by a paper by Corey Guastini and Lance Bozart at University of Albany a couple of years ago, where they did a climatology essentially of where these they term progressive derechos, which are the ones we usually think about, where you've got a one squall line, one bow echo that's producing most of the damage. And so you can see the hot spots kind of in this region, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, but some down in the Southern Plains, some reaching down into the Southeast. Every once in a while they're into the Carolinas, but this is kind of often with these systems, that's the tricky forecast, is whether the system that gets going, over Indiana or Kentucky will actually cross the mountains and make it over into the Carolinas, which most of the time doesn't happen, but when it does happen, can be pretty serious.
So real quick, I wanted to actually share my screen and talk about bow echoes just a little bit. Now you talk about the different kinds of signatures on radar. So for our viewers that are watching, they hear us talk about hook echoes and bow echoes. Tell us, we're talking about derechos right now. So this is predominantly a bow echo. Does this picture sort of correlate what you're talking about in that area?
Yep, that's the classic picture there. The one thing with this is to note that it's each it's showing the line at different times along here, so it's not one massive beast, but it's kind of that curved shape leading edge of this of the line there that's moving off to the southeast is the so that is the June 2012 is about as classic as it gets.
Right, yeah, that one stood out the most. So I don't have any other questions about derechos unless anyone else does. I know certain areas have seen them. We get that along undulating fronts sometimes across the Mid-Atlantic and in the Southeast region. We don't see them so much down here as you do up across the Midwest and parts of the Ohio Valley.
Well, we get derechos, or at least bow echoes, if they don't quite meet the definition of derechos down in this part of the country, especially when we get into northwest flow coming down into the mid-south. And one of the trickiest forecasts here is those overnight MCSs or derechos that come out of the central to southern plains moving southeast, and they cross Arkansas, and they always tend to get to the Mississippi River about the time of minimum heating, sunrise, 7 o'clock in the morning. And, the models typically have not done a real good job of, is that going to hold together, or is it going to fall apart and we just get some light rain throughout the morning hours? Or is it going to be something similar to what we called Hurricane Elvis several years ago, which was 100-mile-an-hour winds that caused all kinds of damage, hundreds of thousands without power here in Memphis. It was a 7 a.m. arrival on a summer morning several years ago. And, that's the worst case scenario. But more often than not, as they start moving out of the Ozarks, some of the higher terrain in northwest Arkansas, as they move this direction, around that time of day, they start to kind of fall apart, and we may get a little lightning and thunder, but generally it's just a rain event. So real tricky forecast problem, and I'm sure that's part of the research that you're doing as well, Russ.
Yeah, and that we had so a few years ago we were part of a field project out in the plains called Pecan, Plains Elevated and Convection at Night. And these were the sorts of questions that were one of the goals of the project. And we actually sort of busted our own forecasts a bunch of times with these big wind, or what looked like they were going to be big wind events that we were going to measure in the project. And there were still storms and sort of isolated severe storms in some cases. But yeah, we had 3 or 4 events where, SPC was going with very high probabilities of severe winds. We were totally on board with that forecast. And then for reasons that people are, trying to figure out now, there were storms, but they didn't get those 80 or 100 mile an hour winds down to the ground like some of the systems do. But on these days, for whatever reason, that didn't happen. So I think it is certainly an active research area and a big challenge, because I think in many cases, like you're pointing out, those early morning situations where it's pretty stable near the surface, that can make a difference between whether the winds are, there's strong winds in the system, but they're only making it down to 1,000 or 2,000 feet above the surface, rather than actually making it down to the ground where they're going to produce the impacts.
And maybe I'm sorry.
Ahead.
Okay. I don't know if we'll get into this more a little bit later on, but since we're talking about the topic here, how have with the advent of some of these CAM models and the rapid refresh type of models, how, and it may be just in a generalized way, do they do a fairly decent job with this type of system as far as where and when they're going to blow up and how long they're going to last before they finally fall apart?
I mean, certainly far better than was the case, 5 or 10 years. I mean,
sure.
the forecasts you get from the CAMs are sort of worlds beyond what the kind of guesses you'd be making with some of the previous generation of models. But I think it's still a mixed bag in a lot of ways in terms of how well they do. I mean, one of the sort of golden cases or whatever was that Missouri super derecho of 2009, where this was the early days of running these high resolution models at NCAR, and they produced essentially a perfect forecast of that system about a day in advance. And so that, that was like, wow, this is really possible to do this and get good forecasts. But there's plenty of other examples where things are not so good, and I think that's still sort of where the place where we are is there's some cases where it's unbelievable how good the models do, and then other days where the performance is not so great, and I'm not sure that we can know that we know all that well yet to predict which of those days the models are going to perform well and which ones they're not.
Thanks.
Russ, we have a viewer question. This is from Francis Tablino. I hope I pronounced your last name right, Francis. But she was wanting to know what season are these most common in? What season do we mostly see derechos?
Yeah, in that sort of core Midwest region, mostly summertime, June, July, August. Southern Plains would probably be, or the Southeast would be probably a little earlier in the year there, but yeah, often that that pattern builds in where it's getting pretty it's more of a summertime thing than a springtime thing, whereas tornadoes sort of peak in that springtime to early summer. The derechos are a bit more common in the sort of core summertime months.
All right, we appreciate that. Let's kind of turn the gears just a little bit. Let's talk about MCS and MCV systems. Tell us a little bit about those and how we can depict those maybe from what these derechos are.
Yeah, so the terminology and everything here is often confusing even to us, I think, in the field, that are in the meteorological field, and even more so for folks outside of the field. I will try to share a graphic here again real quick, if that works. This is one that I have got from one of my classes, and so this is here's a few different examples here, and there's a definition from the glossary meteorology, but I think the takeaway here actually is summarized nicely in this Venn diagram from Markowski and Richardson's mesoscale textbook, where MCS is sort of the the broad catch-all terminology for just about any, somewhat organized system of thunderstorms that so it's got to be an organized system of storm, much bigger than sort of an individual, updraft and downdraft of a thunderstorm. You're getting lots and lots of those together, and it might form into a line shape. It might form into some kind of cluster. Lots of other, possibilities there around that. But so MCS, mesoscale convective system, is kind of the overarching, that's the purple circle here that sort of is a catch-all for lots and lots of subtypes of other types of systems that people have classified. And some of, in this research area, it seems that we really like to try to come up with names for things or new acronyms or whatever else. So it can often add to the confusion for people that aren't sort of, fully entrenched in that area. But some of those subtypes that are well known, one is the mesoscale convective complex, or MCC. And what that is a type of MCS that is essentially very large and very circular in character, especially as you look at it from satellite. That's how they were first identified, was from some of the first infrared satellite images. And so it's a big, and I've got here is an actual example of one here from a few years ago. So you've got, this is an infrared satellite image. So it's, this big circular thing that underneath it has lots of, maybe one or more little lines of storms under there, and they're producing this giant anvil. And so that's one, well-known and well-studied subtype. Those are common in the central U.S. for sure. East of the Rockies is one of the main places where these happen, but also other parts of the world, in Asia and China, they're quite common. In parts of Africa, in South America. So these are observed in lots of different places. So that is sort of at the very, very organized, very, large scale of MCSs. Then there are squall lines, which fit into that sort of MCS definition as well. Those are, as the example that Shay showed there, is, a line of storms that you'd see on radar or on satellite. And then within that category would be a subcategory of those would be bow echoes, where you have the line of storms that takes on this bowing shape that you see here, and often those are associated with these very strong winds and derechos. And then, within this, we could come with, people have sort of come up with lots of additional names and classifications over time for systems that produce heavy rainfall, or systems that are organized or have a certain shape. But that's kind of the overview, is that MCS is sort of a very broad general term for lots of these systems of organized thunderstorms. But then there's all these different subtypes that people have identified and studied. And you see, on any given day in the spring or summer, you're probably likely to see one of these MCS, or one or many of these MCSs somewhere in the country. So they're very, very common in the summertime, and they produce a large fraction of the rainfall in the spring and summer across, especially across the central and eastern United States.
Russ, I got one more question, and then I'll open it up to our panelists. We'll put our social science hat on right now. How do you think we as meteorologists, maybe the media in general, how can we communicate better the threats, particularly for a derecho, and then the systems that we talked about? How can we communicate those threats in a better way for folks to understand? And maybe, like you were talking about earlier, a lot of people who associate wind damage, it automatically has to be a tornado. How can we communicate that wind is wind. No matter if it's rotating or a straight line, it's going to do damage.
Yeah, I think it's a big challenge right now because for lots of reasons, it seems that people have become a bit desensitized to severe thunderstorm warnings and perhaps don't take them particularly seriously, or whether it's the hail or the wind, it doesn't cause that same reaction in people as a tornado warning. I mean, the sort of recent example of the really, really kind of devastating example of this was the duck boat incident in Missouri back in July, where there was a severe thunderstorm warning in place, but did they get that warning, and would it do anything about it in even if they got it? I think these are big questions, and I think that right, a lot of attention goes to tornadoes, and rightfully so, but I think there's a lot of challenges around what we need to do with severe thunderstorms going forward, because that one severe thunderstorm killed a very large number of people, and often more than a lot of tornadoes do. And so those are I don't have a good answer for that, I guess, but I hope it's something that we start thinking more seriously about is how if there's ways we can make the severe thunderstorm warning product or the way we do that, give that similar attention to what's being given to improving tornado warnings.
Now, I have a question about MCVs, mesoscale convective vortex.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen these travel from like Atlanta, Georgia, where a lot of mesolows develop. And so I've always been sort of confused as to what defines a mesolow versus a mesoscale convective vortex. And it's really impressive. It looks like a really tightly wound low pressure system that just spins right along. And I've watched a couple of these go right just downslope all the way to the ocean. And then you got to watch for possible tropical development. But it's really unique because we don't hear MCV very often. And when would we apply that to a system that we see? I know here with the NSSL says a core of only 30 to 60 miles wide, but is there any other criteria that could define it?
Yeah, that's one where we probably don't have a very concrete definition in place. But I mean, what you described was certainly a good example of an MCV. And yeah, usually what happens is in these is you have a squall of mesoscale convective complexes, some big organized storm system that usually they form sort of as the system is winding down, going towards the next morning or whatever, and it leaves behind this circulation that they can go on for days, and they have a lot of connections in the way that they form with the way that tropical systems form. Obviously, they usually don't have that source of warm water underneath like we know about over the oceans for tropical systems. But they're warm core systems. They form sort of, you showed that the sort of bubbling stuff out over the Atlantic at the beginning, out over there, and it's not, and that it takes a few days for those sorts of things to spin up into tropical systems. It's not too different over the continent, where you'll get one of these big convective systems. It leaves behind one of those circulations, and then that circulation can go on the next day to be sort of a focus for more storms, and that can proceed for numerous days. There have been instances where one will form over land, like you said, and then move out over the ocean, and then you get a tropical system out over the Gulf Stream or something like that. So yeah, so the definition wise, I don't know, it's probably more one of those, when you see it kind of things, because they pop out really nicely on satellite imagery in a lot of cases. But yeah, that was the topic that I did most of my dissertation research on, was looking at those that they'll form one day, and then the next day they move over somewhere else, and then storms form there, and that is often a ripe situation for really heavy rainfall and flash floods, and kind of that where they tend to seem to occur a lot is that kind of corridor between like North Texas across Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky kind of area, where those will, if they can hold together and interact with, flow, the moisture coming in off the Gulf of Mexico, you can get these systems that are really hard to forecast, and they're not very big in area, but then they'll just sit there and dump 8 or 10 inches of rain in a few hours.
Right. I think Hurricane Arthur 2014 is a good example of an MCS over land. I know the NHC circled the area days before we were watching. It was like, wow. I mean, this was a pretty intense, pretty good size MCS that just slowly made its way over. Once it got over the Atlantic, dropped south along the Gulf Stream, and then came back up.
Yeah.
So that's your classic homegrown system right there. Really neat to see that area circled over land long, a day and a half before it made it to the ocean. So I think Chris has a question for you as well.
Absolutely. How's it going, Russ? Question. I spent about 5 weeks of this spring out on the plains chasing storms.
Mm-hmm.
So this spring, obviously, there was a below normal tornado year for the plains, and with that below normal tornado year, to me, it seems like it was an above normal MCS year because you had so much upscale growth with the storms so quickly. What do you think might be the cause of that? I mean, is that anything to look at going into next year? Or is it just your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a good question to be asking, and I'm not sure that I or maybe anybody has a great answer to that at this point, because I think these are the sorts of questions people want to know about going, at sort of this seasonal scale, right? I mean, obviously chasers, we kind of want to know about it there, but in terms of, preparing for an active above average, below average, whatever, people want to be prepared for that. It obviously, I mean, I think more recently here later, in the middle of the summer, where we've had this, the giant ridge set up over the western U.S. where it's been so hot, and then we get northwest flow over the central part of the country. That's a pretty good setup for organized systems to grow and develop. But going back into the spring, that's when, right, you expect supercells. You don't expect, or you expect the supercells to maybe grow up into MCSs, but we didn't get that to happen very often this year. So it's I think there are some people that are starting to think about these more seasonal aspects of the severe weather or and how it relates to storm structure. But I'd say it's not something we have much, certainly not much predictive skill in at this point, as you're probably well acquainted with. You can't know even a couple weeks in advance when you should take your chasing trip or whatever.
Oh, absolutely. And real quick before we move on here, I want to share my screen here. And you said something a while ago that was really that really caught me, and I had to go back through some of my pictures and look. You're talking about especially when you get the upscale growth into these multi-cluster storms and stuff like that, where you get the huge anvils. And this is from if you guys can see my screen here, June 1st, and near Sargent, Nebraska. This is at 3:20 in the afternoon, and you can see it's just a nice little cumulus. And then by 4 o'clock, you're starting to get some more cumulus. I'm just sitting on the side of the road. Then by 5 o'clock, hey, we got a nice base there. And see, that's what you think of, the prototypical supercell. Not that much precipitation. See the base, and then by 5:30, we got this nice guy. Now you got a rotating base, but then this.
Yeah.
You get all these nice vertical, updrafts going into one massive anvil. And when you said that just caught me.
Yeah.
And then, of course, this storm continued on. It went on to produce an EF1 tornado right at dark, as it was basically a QLCS at that point. Right there's the.
Yeah.
It started to come down, but yeah, that just caught me.
Then you get those big, nice big shelf clouds too, and if it happens before dark and you see those big lines coming through, which is not what you want to see if you're trying to see tornadoes, but certainly can be beautiful as well.
That's right.
All right, Russ. I think we've gone through a bunch of the scientific questions that maybe the panel has. Now we cannot let you go tonight without asking you about your appearances on Jeopardy and how that all turned out. I did a little research. I found out that you were one of the big winners on Tournament of Champions. Tell us about meeting Alex Trebek and that experience that you had.
Yeah, so it was super fun. Yeah, I first tried out in Denver here I guess it was 2003 when they came around doing auditions, and it was a show I had watched all growing up, and I did like Quiz Bowl and stuff in high school and college and that kind of thing. So it was always something I had in the back of my mind, that'd be a cool thing to do, but it wasn't something I thought all that much about until they came here and I went and did the audition, and then they called me out to be on the show, and I was very fortunate that I met a person here in Colorado who had been on the show previously, and had built up basically a simulator with the buzzers and the kind of real life gameplay and all this kind of thing. And so we practiced, me and some friends, we went and practiced a lot before I went out to tape the show. So I felt really, well prepared going in, but you never know what's going to happen when you get there. You don't know what if the categories are going to be good or bad, and so just you kind of just go in and you really just want to win one game, but for 2/3 of the people that doesn't even happen, and so I was fortunate enough to win the first game, which was a close one, and then kind of went on a run for a few days, and then it was enough to qualify for the Tournament of Champions, and somehow I went through and won that thing, and then which I assumed was kind of the end of all of it. But then they did this tournament just a few years ago. It was the 30th anniversary of the show. They did this tournament called the Battle of the Decades, where they invited people back from all 30 years of the show, and so I got to go back and go back again and kind of meet people that I had that I had seen on TV and stuff, which was super cool. And I made it to the semifinals of that, and what sort of the weird thing that happened in that was I got a weather category in one of the games. And this was one of the clues, which, this was like right after we had been out in the field launching weather balloons. And so that was pretty fun. When I saw the category come up, I was terrified, because I knew that if I screwed something up in a weather category, I'd never live it down. But fortunately, they were ones that I could, because often if it's something a lot about, then you way overthink that thing. But anyway, it worked. I think I got 4 out of the 5 there, so it worked out okay. And so that was a fun. It's just a super fun experience overall. The people at the show are great, and make it a good experience. And I couldn't ask for better opportunity to be able to do something like that.
Is that something you prepare for mentally, or do you just remember? Do you just have a knack for remembering a lot of things?
I mean, I think you have to have that, but yeah, I studied quite a lot. The things that come up on the show a lot, presidents and state capitals, and then stuff that I knew almost nothing about, like Shakespeare and mythology and stuff, at least to try and get some like basic level of literacy in some of those categories. So I did a lot of, made a lot of flashcards and stuff like that. But now in more recent years, there's some people who have tried to hack the game, essentially, because now the record of every clue is on jarchive.org, and you can grab, if you're good enough with your data analysis, you can go grab the full data set, and people have tried to crunch the numbers about where on the board does the daily double show up, and how much should I bet in this scenario, and all these kinds of things. So it some people just go on just because it's going to be fun, and then some people take it super seriously and try to prepare as much as they can for it.
Well, are you still honed in on your skills? Would you take a Jeopardy question now?
I can take one. I don't know how I'll do, but
I just picked something. Okay, here we go for 2000. On October 19th, 1936, this psychologist delivered a lecture the concept of the collective unconscious to the Abernethy Society at St. Bartholomew's Hospital in London.
Yeah, I want to say Freud, or who is Freud, but I'm afraid that's not the right answer.
Carl Jung.
It was Jung. Okay, yeah,
Jung.
it's either Freud or Jung.
I just picked something random out there, but I mean, yeah, I tell you what, I love watching Jeopardy, and it's fascinating when people just pop those things off. You're like, wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, and it's pretty cool that it's one of these shows that's been around for 30 some years now, and it's basically still the same show that it was when it started, and people still watch it.
Good stuff. Well, Russ, we really appreciate you being on with us tonight, and I can say we've never had a Jeopardy champion on our show that I know of, so that's a first as well. If our followers and listeners to the podcast want to follow your research that you guys are doing out at Colorado State, how can they do that?
Well, I don't know. I guess I don't keep my website as updated as I probably could, but certainly a lot of the stuff is there on which my sort of research website is schumacher.atmos.colostate.edu. I've got Twitter, Russ_Schumacher. It's again, I sort of sometimes I'm not as active on it as probably as many people are on Twitter, but feel free to follow. Certainly try to post things there every now and then.
Awesome. Well, Russ, we really appreciate you being on with us tonight, and some great information that we can be able to take back, and we appreciate your time.
Great. Happy to be able to do it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. No problem. Stick around if you want to. We do a little segment called Tweet of the Week, and this is where the panelists go around and something they've discovered on Twitter throughout the week, and they like to share it. I know James had his tweet. Jared, do you have that already dialed up, or do I need to give you a minute?
Give me a second. I'm going to dial that Tucker up for him.
Okay. Does anybody else have a tweet to start with?
I'll start it all.
Go ahead,
Okay,
Chris.
Go ahead,
All right.
Chris.
Let's see here. Let me get a screen share rolling.
Yeah, Chris, we can put that really cool shelf cloud you had up.
Yeah,
also
absolutely.
in a little bit. So.
All right. Yeah, we'll do that just as soon as I get done with this. The NOAA satellites, and they had a tweet about the GLM lightning mapper from GO-16 across the Carolinas the other night, just showing how much intense lightning there was, especially across, I guess, the PD region and up coastal regions of South Carolina and North Carolina across the Grand Strand. And I noticed that Colorado State also has incorporated the GLM into their RAAMB slider. I can't remember the acronym.
Sierra Ram B.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Anybody else?
Yeah, I can go if you want.
Okay. Go ahead, Eric.
All right, we referenced earlier the smoke trails that were going into the eastern U.S., and so the Weather Service in Memphis tweeted out how close that got to our area, and let me make sure that you guys can see that. So this is from NWS Memphis a few days ago, and there is a kind of a streak, a light streak going across eastern Missouri down in the Lower Ohio River, right basically over Nashville and then into the Smoky Mountains. And that's where the jet stream was a couple of days ago, bringing the smoke down. And this was actually smoke from wildfires in Canada, not the ones in California, but the jet stream had that nice little dip in it. And you can see kind of how close it got to the Memphis area there. So pretty close, but a really interesting pattern to be able to see that wrapping this time of year, to see the jet stream dipping that low around that trough up in the northeast too.
That's really cool. Like that's awesome right there. Good stuff. Let's see, Jared. I think you got James. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
So James is off tonight. He told us about 2 or 3 hours ago he was not going to be able to make it, and this is why. He's watching the Charlotte Knights play baseball tonight in downtown Charlotte, and it's a beautiful night out there. But I think the Knights are getting beat, so it's James. It's James's fault. He's jinxed them.
Yeah, it's not looking good for the Knights, but so it goes. But many thanks to James for giving me a very easy control board to work tonight. So while we're here, I might as well just go. This is I did find this on Twitter, but it is hosted on Instagram by Kyle Platt. And well, let me just start it up here. I don't know if you're going to be able to hear it, but oh, there's two David Paynes. There's two of them. There's two of them. Double the pleasure, double the pain.
And at one point during the video, David Payne tells the other David Payne, "Move out of the way."
Yes, exactly. Yeah, he gets him out of the way, doesn't David? You got to get out of my way, man. It's kind of like the movie Multiplicity, which is if you've ever seen that, how crazy that movie can be with Michael Keaton decidedly not being Batman. So that was a lot of fun.
Yes. I laughed so hard that I had a few tears coming to my eyes watching that last night. So, yeah. All right, Jay, I know you've got one pulled up. Go ahead.
All right, this came from Bill Walsh, and let's see, trying to see, Rusty Streetman actually provided this video feed. This is Isle of Palms from Monday morning. We had a really nice line of storms just off the coastline, really intense cumuliform storms. And this is a rather fairly large water spout for just off the beach at Isle of Palms. We typically don't get them this close. They're usually on the island tips where the coastal breaks are, where you have the very light winds and diversity in the directions. These really line up along the coast. Saw them early on, went ahead and put the warnings out to everybody that to keep an eye on the maritime environment, especially a lot of the near shore, inshore fishermen. But they're always so helpful in getting pictures of these things as well. But pretty neat water spout for us anyways. When we get it, this is that time of the year we get them fairly, I'd say regularly. They're not unheard of, but ones that big, that close to the beach, we don't usually see them like that. So Edisto, maybe a little further south to Edisto, Hilton Head. Sometimes they get a little close to the beach there.
Shay, do you know, did that one come ashore or did it stay off?
No, it did not come ashore. No. We that rarely ever happens here. And there may be some on some of the barrier islands to the north around Bulls Bay. Some of those spots up there may see some landfalling water spouts, but we wouldn't know because no one's there. It's kind of like, if a tree falls in the woods, no one's there to hear it. Did it really fall?
Right. All right. Yeah, I saw that video earlier this week and thought that was fascinating. Well, and here's my tweet of the week. It also deals with the South Carolina coast. And I want to congratulate our good buddy Ed Piotrowski. He was nominated and won the Best Weathercaster of the Year for the state of South Carolina from WPDE in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. So Ed Piotrowski won the Weathercaster of the Year award for the state of South Carolina. So congratulations, Ed. And we congratulated him on Twitter, and he said, "Hey, when are you going to have me back on the show?" So we're going to be working hopefully to get Ed on hopefully in the next couple of months. So big congratulations from all of us here to Ed Piotrowski. He's a good guy. Shay, I know you've been able to interact with him some.
Yeah. We talked a good bit. Yeah, we sure do. In fact, Rob Fowler is going to be coming on next month with us as well. Maybe we can have them together. Yeah. We can have a fun show with those two.
That'll be a great show. Speaking of shows, let's look at our schedule for the next couple of weeks. Next week, we have Mark Willis on from Surfline. He's going to be talking to us. We're actually going to start the show about 15 minutes early next week. At 8 o'clock, we're going to have Candace Jordan on. She is heading up the weatherproof event that myself and Shay and Chris and James will be attending next Saturday afternoon at the Schneel Museum in Gastonia. Come out and see us. We'd love to chat with you guys. But Candace is going to be joining us at 8 o'clock next week to talk to us about the weatherproof event. And then we'll have Mark jump on afterwards. And then on the 29th, we're going to be talking to Chris Ray and Wesley Shaw with My Coast. They kind of document the tides throughout the East Coast and the Gulf Coast, and they're going to talk to us about their program. And then on September 5th, we're going to be talking about topographical influences with hurricanes with Dr. Jan DeHart, another Colorado State University professor there. So, Russ, we're bringing a lot of Colorado State folks on, you and Phil and Jan. So, yeah, happy to have you guys. So, for all of us here at the Carolina Weather Group, please go check out the Schneel Museum. website. Find out about Weatherproof. We'd love to see you there. Also, the Mid-Atlantic ChaserCon taking place October 27th in Richmond, Virginia. You can go on Google and Google that up and look at the lineup there. So we'd love to see you up there as well. So for everyone here at the Carolina Weather Group, we hope you have a great rest of the week. And as we close out, I'm going to let Chris Jackson pull up his shelf cloud that he got just a couple of weeks ago. We were kind of talking about shelfies, and look at this beauty right here. This is a great way to close out the show. Chris, I'll let you talk to us about it and close us out.
Oh, no, it was just crazy because the storm wasn't even severe warned, but I guess it just worked out to where it produced a beautiful shelf cloud right for sunset. I think this is on August 3rd, and this is right over the Columbia Metro Airport. So we've got a nice clear view to the horizon here, and I was able to get a nice picture of it. One of the best looking shelf clouds I've ever seen in my life.
That is a beauty right there. That reminds me of something you'd see in Clearwater, Florida. That's gorgeous how it just lines up. And that's like the best feeling here, too. And it's hot and humid.
Oh, yeah.
And you get a shelf cloud go over you at the beach, and you get all your gear's packed up. You don't have any kites out to blow away into the ocean because you know that powerful offshore wind is getting ready to come in. With that temperature drop of 20 degrees, that cool air, as long as it's not too much lightning, not any lightning. Let's say any lightning.
That's right.
It feels great.
Absolutely.
And I'm sorry, before we close tonight, we wanted to wish Eric it's not really a farewell, is it, Eric? You're going to be joining us from show to show, but we're just not going to be able to have you on every night as you kind of get ready for the new fall and the school year with your kiddos. So we want to say we appreciated your commitment this summer, and we look forward to having you on later on down the road.
Thanks a bunch. Yeah, it's hard to believe that a year has gone by since I started on the panel, but it has. And appreciate the opportunity to do so. I interviewed some great guests, learned an awful lot, and that's the best part of it is learning from everybody that comes on and getting to meet fabulous folks like you. So I appreciate that, and I look forward to guesting every once in a while. Yeah,
so Eric's not gone forever, but he is going to be joining us throughout the rest of the year on some periodically on some shows. So Eric, we wish the best to you and look forward to having you back. I think you've already penciled in a few dates, haven't you?
Yeah, looking forward to coming on to talk to Rick Smith here in a few weeks. So
definitely so. Well, we appreciate that, Eric. Have a great weekend, and everyone else, we hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you back here next Wednesday night for another episode of Carolina Weather Group. Talk to you then.